Hey guys, tonight we slip into the swirling waters of the Pacific in 1942, a time when tension hangs as heavy as the humid, salty air over coral atolls. You probably won't survive this without at least a little chill down your spine. Though, let's be honest, most of us are just here in pajamas with a cup of tea, not a life vest. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's fascinating to see how far and wide we all are when these stories unfold. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along the prelude to what will become the Battle of Midway, imagining yourself as a silent observer to the tense chessboard of the Pacific. Japan's empire is expanding rapidly, taking islands and resources with near impunity, while the U.S. Navy scrambles to anticipate the next move. Ships glide like ghosts through the morning mist, their steel hulls reflecting both sun and threat, and you feel the nervous energy pulsing across thousands of miles of ocean. Historians still argue whether U.S. intelligence could have completely prevented Japan's advance if decisions had been swifter, but here you are, caught in the moment when tension is as tangible as the spray of the waves. At Pearl Harbor, the shock of the previous December's attack lingers, but now the Pacific is no longer a distant concern. It's a living, breathing arena. Sailors run drills you can almost hear echoing through the decks, and aircraft carriers hum with readiness, engines thrumming like restless beasts. You imagine the smells, burnt fuel, sea salt, and the faint tang of metal, blending into a prelude only the most attuned senses could endure. Meanwhile, Japanese forces chart courses through turquoise waters, confident, calculating, unaware of the silent codes being broken back in Hawaii. And you probably never realized how eerily meticulous pre-battle routines can be: sailors rolling ropes, officers checking charts, each tiny motion part of a much larger, deadly dance. Even the coral reefs seem to hold their breath, as if nature itself senses the coming clash. Somewhere, a curious historical footnote: some Japanese sailors carried tiny lucky charms for protection against sharks, a blend of superstition and superstition-driven morale, reminding you that even in high-tech war, humans remain human. As you follow the invisible threads of strategy, logistics, and anticipation, you can almost hear the whispered calculations of admirals on both sides, their minds racing over maps and cryptic signals. The world teeters on the brink of change, and you, dear listener, are riding these waves of uncertainty, feeling the electric tension before the storm breaks. You drift now into the quiet hum of intelligence rooms, where analysts pore over strings of coded Japanese messages, the air thick with cigarette smoke and the faint scent of ink-stained paper. You watch over their shoulders as they painstakingly piece together the puzzle, each letter and number a whisper of the enemy's intentions. Historians still argue whether the breakthroughs at Station HYPO and other code-breaking centers truly gave the U.S. Navy an insurmountable edge, but right now, you're in the middle of that revelation, feeling the tension swell with every decoded line. The cryptanalysts' work is like a dimly lit clockwork, intricate and precise, each click bringing the Pacific closer to collision. You imagine yourself leaning over a map, tracing the routes of Japanese carriers and supply ships, your fingers hovering above the dots representing aircraft squadrons that will soon soar through the sky. The air smells faintly of sea and ink, a combination that sticks to your senses as if warning you that secrets, once uncovered, can shift the course of history. Among the scribbled notes, a curious detail emerges. Some codebreakers used crossword puzzle techniques to spot repeated patterns, a surprisingly domestic tool applied in the service of war. It's almost charming in its absurdity, yet deadly serious, highlighting the bizarre interplay of ordinary human intellect against global conflict. Meanwhile, in the calm yet anxious rooms of naval intelligence, officers debate the meaning of intercepted messages. One moment, there's a confident smile that a breakthrough has been made; the next, a frown as conflicting interpretations arise. You probably didn't realize that even in life-and-death situations, human error and doubt play as much a role as strategy. Across the Pacific, Japanese forces operate under the assumption of secrecy and surprise, unaware that their coded communications have been cracked. You can almost feel the invisible threads stretching from the Hawaiian Islands to Midway, like ghosts connecting decisions to consequences. And then, a fringe tidbit. Some intelligence officers swore by lucky charms or ritualized routines, pouring tea 3 times before decoding a message, or wearing a certain tie, tiny acts of superstition to keep calm under immense pressure. You observe all of this, understanding that in war, information isn't just power, it's a form of psychological leverage, shaping confidence and doubt alike. As the sun rises over the Pacific, fleets begin their final movements, guided not by brute force alone but by the quiet triumphs of minds behind desks. Every decoded signal is a heartbeat, a subtle tremor that will crescendo in the coming chaos. You glide now into the metallic heart of the fleets themselves, where aircraft carriers stretch across the ocean like floating cities bristling with planes, crew, and barely contained energy. You can hear the low hum of engines, the clatter of tools, and the murmur of sailors preparing for what they sense will be decisive. Historians still argue whether the U.S. Navy's choice of carriers at Midway, Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown was sheer luck or a calculated gamble, but here you are, seeing them lined up like chess pieces ready to spring into motion. You trace the flight decks with your eyes, imagining tiny figures running, shouting, adjusting launch angles, all orchestrated with terrifying precision. As you wander along the deck in your mind, the scent of fuel and hot metal rises, mingling with the tang of sea spray. Pilots double-check their planes, fastening straps, checking fuel lines, and running engines through pre-flight drills that feel ritualistic yet absolutely vital. Some carry trinkets in their pockets, a small photograph, a lucky coin, tiny anchors of normalcy against the enormous stress of impending battle. Meanwhile, sailors below deck are shoving ammunition into elevators, coordinating catapults, and mentally rehearsing maneuvers you can barely keep up with. You probably never thought about how synchronized a carrier's operation must be, each person's tiny action rippling outward to affect survival. The Japanese carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, move in mirrored precision, their decks equally busy, officers striding back and forth with clipped commands. You notice subtle differences. The Japanese craft are sleek and meticulously maintained, with a sense of ceremonial pride that contrasts the slightly more ragged but no less deadly U.S. decks. A fringe tidbit floats in your awareness. Some Japanese pilots were forbidden to paint personal insignia on their planes, a superstition meant to avoid offending spirits, while U.S. pilots sometimes added cartoonish mascots for morale. It's a tiny detail that feels almost absurd, yet these human touches thread through the vast machinery of war. As you linger, the fleet's positions begin to take shape, with task forces moving into likely ambush points. Maps and signals are exchanged, flags raised and lowered, smoke rising from funnels in the pre-dawn light. You can almost hear the mental calculations of the admirals as they anticipate attacks, reposition squadrons, and weigh risk against potential reward. Historians still debate how much the U.S. fleet understood of the Japanese plan at this moment, but your presence in this imagined space allows you to feel the tension, the anticipation, and the quiet thrum of readiness that precedes any great confrontation. By the time dawn breaks fully, you can sense that the chessboard is set, the pieces poised, and the Pacific holding its breath for the first move. You drift into the mind of the Japanese planners, sensing the careful orchestration behind what they believe will be a flawless expansion. Their strategy is audacious. Lure the U.S. carriers into a trap near Midway, seize the island, and solidify dominance across the Central Pacific. You can almost feel their confidence, a mixture of pride and meticulous calculation, as maps are spread across lacquered tables and admirals trace routes with fine brushes of ink. Historians still argue whether the Japanese underestimated U.S. intelligence or simply overestimated their own invincibility, but in this moment, their plan feels both elegant and terrifying. The sun rises over the carrier groups, casting long shadows that stretch across decks like warnings. You imagine the hum of aircraft engines as pilots perform final checks, the metallic taste of adrenaline mingling with the sea air. Tiny details leap out. Some pilots carefully polish their goggles, others whisper prayers to protect them from unseen dangers. It's easy to forget that these fleets, so mechanized and formidable, are powered ultimately by human nerves and superstition. You probably never realized how much ritual and tiny personal gestures threaded through grand military strategy, yet they shape morale as much as tactics. Meanwhile, the Americans, guided by broken codes and gut instinct, are already moving to intercept, like predators anticipating prey. The Japanese plan relies on surprise and deception. Bait ships to venture into what seems an empty expanse, then strike decisively. You sense the tension thickening across thousands of miles of ocean, the invisible strings of intent drawing the two forces inexorably closer. Historians still debate whether Admiral Yamamoto fully appreciated the risk of U.S. carriers lurking unexpectedly, but as you drift along these mental currents, you understand that no plan survives the first encounter with reality. A quirky detail surfaces in your awareness. Some Japanese sailors believed that their meals prepared by the fleet's cooks could carry protective energy, a superstition intertwined with morale. Meanwhile, officers meticulously calculate flight paths, fuel loads, and the timing of strikes, each decision balancing audacity with caution. You can almost feel the rising tension, a charged electricity in the warm Pacific morning as the carriers fan out, aircraft ready, and the vast blue stage prepares to host the first deadly acts of what will become a turning point. You, floating above this human drama, are aware of the fragile interplay between planning, luck, and fate, all converging on Midway. You glide into the morning light over Midway, the horizon glowing with pale gold as the first airstrikes begin to roar into action. The U.S. carriers launch their planes with meticulous timing, engines shrieking and propellers slicing the air like impatient predators. You probably won't survive the chaos if you were actually there, but as a listener, you drift through it safely, a ghost witnessing carnage in slow motion. Soaring above the fleet, you see dive bombers and torpedo planes carving arcs through the sky, smoke trails marking paths of both hope and impending doom. Historians still argue whether the initial U.S. strikes were purely luck or the result of brilliant timing and intelligence, but your perspective blurs these lines into one breathtaking, tense panorama. Japanese ships, sleek and disciplined, attempt to defend themselves, anti-aircraft guns belching fire and smoke. You notice the symmetry of their formation, almost choreographed, as if the ocean itself were the stage for a deadly ballet. Sailors duck behind railings, shout orders, and fire flares, each motion an instinct honed by years of training yet tethered to a fragile thread of luck. Meanwhile, small quirks persist amid chaos. A pilot's radio jams, leaving him whispering frantic updates to empty airwaves, and an anxious sailor's lucky charm, a tiny tiger figurine, remains clasped in his palm, a talisman against fate. These human touches contrast sharply with the mechanical precision surrounding them. From the air, you see explosions bloom across the decks of carriers, the deck crews scrambling to extinguish fires while coordinating launch and recovery of planes. You probably never considered how terrifyingly complex these operations become under fire, yet each tiny motion carries the weight of survival. On Midway itself, garrisons brace, anti-aircraft guns firing into the sky, the coral atolls shuddering under concussive blasts. Historians still debate how much the Japanese underestimated the speed and coordination of the U.S. defense. But as you float above the scene, you understand that perception and reality collide in ways no map can fully capture. Amid the fury, a fringe tidbit appears. Some dive bomber pilots would hum tunes to calm nerves mid-flight, an oddly domestic ritual against the backdrop of destruction. You drift alongside them, sensing the pulse of adrenaline, fear, and determination coursing through every individual. The early morning strikes set the tone for a battle that will ripple through history, a chaotic dance where strategy, bravery, luck, and human error converge. Every bomb dropped, every evasive maneuver, carries echoes that will reverberate long after the smoke clears, and you, floating above it all, feel the weight and majesty of this pivotal moment in the Pacific. You hover above the torpedo squadrons now, the brave pilots straining against gravity and fear as they dive toward the Japanese fleet. Their engines roar, propellers slicing the warm morning air, and you can almost taste the salt spray mixed with fuel fumes drifting from the ships below. You probably won't survive this dive yourself. Thankfully, you're just a witness. But the courage of these men, flying slow, lumbering torpedo planes into a storm of anti-aircraft fire, is impossible to ignore. Historians still argue whether the decision to send these planes without fighter cover was sheer necessity or a miscalculation, but in the moment, their audacity is raw and visceral. You notice the torpedo planes' awkward, low-altitude approach, their pilots straining to maintain control under punishing fire. The Japanese ships erupt with a storm of flak, and you feel the tension as tracers zip past, slicing the sunlight. Each plane seems both insignificant and monumental against the mass of the enemy, and you can almost hear the creak of wings, the whispered prayers, and the muttered curses under breath. A quirky detail: some pilots carried personal letters tucked in the fuselage, little reminders of loved ones far away, tiny threads of humanity amid mechanical chaos. It's both heartbreaking and strangely comforting that even in the jaws of death, these small acts persist. The attacks are devastating in their futility, many planes are shot down before they can release torpedoes, and the few that make it past anti-aircraft fire often miss their marks. You probably didn't realize just how heroic and yet hopeless these sorties often were, a tragic ballet where bravery collides with technological limitations. Meanwhile, observers on other decks track the unfolding disaster, shouting in disbelief as aircraft are consumed by fire. Historians still debate whether better coordination with dive bombers could have reduced these losses, highlighting the fragile balance between strategy and circumstance. A fringe tidbit drifts into your awareness. Some torpedo pilots practiced intricate pre-flight routines, like tapping the nose of the plane for luck or drawing a quick sketch in the cockpit, superstitions meant to keep their nerves steady. And you, gliding above, witness not only the physical toll but the emotional weight, the raw human determination clashing against overwhelming odds. Each dive, each missed strike, each explosion is a story of courage, desperation, and the relentless, unforgiving nature of warfare at sea. The scene is chaotic, almost surreal, yet it is this very chaos that sets the stage for the pivotal turns to come. You drift into the turning tide now, where chaos begins to crystallize into opportunity. U.S. dive bombers, high above in the sky, spot the Japanese carriers just as they prepare to rearm and refuel aircraft, a moment that feels almost cinematic in its vulnerability. You probably won't survive being in the blast radius of what comes next, but floating here, you can witness the meticulous timing that will change the course of the Pacific. Historians still argue whether sheer luck or strategic patience created this opening, but you can feel the electric anticipation in every pilot's nerves as they align their dives with deadly precision. From your elevated view, the Japanese decks are alive with activity, men scrambling to handle ordnance, moving bombs and torpedoes, unaware that the sky above carries destruction. Smoke wafts from exhausts, and the sun glints off polished metal, almost blinding in its normalcy. A quirky tidbit: some pilots carried tiny dolls or charms in their cockpit, a reminder of home, perhaps to distract themselves from the ever-present threat of death. You watch them approach, a silent ballet of machines and men, diving at steep angles, pulling back just in time to release bombs with terrifying accuracy. Every dive seems to stretch time, the seconds elongating as you feel the tension coil tighter around the fleets below. Explosions erupt in brilliant orange and black blooms, fire and smoke spiraling upward as ordnance finds its mark on the Japanese carriers. Decks buckle under impact, planes erupt into flames, and the disciplined formations of the enemy begin to fragment. You probably never realized how pivotal timing could be, how a few minutes' difference could have turned this disaster into a strategic stalemate. Historians still debate the extent to which earlier losses of torpedo squadrons cleared the decks for these decisive dives, highlighting the delicate interplay of sacrifice and opportunity. A fringe observation catches your attention. Some Japanese sailors instinctively threw life jackets over burning planes, almost ritualistically, as if performing tiny acts of defiance against fate itself. You sense the human pulse of courage and desperation interwoven with the mechanical precision of war machines. Above it all, the tide of battle shifts, the U.S. planes' coordinated dives igniting a chain reaction that the Japanese fleet cannot contain. Floating in this suspended moment, you feel the thrill, horror, and awe of history tipping on a knife edge, every heartbeat a potential pivot in the Pacific theater. You hover above the Japanese carriers as the infernos consume them, flames leaping from deck to deck, black smoke curling into the morning sky. The once pristine vessels, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, are now islands of fire, each explosion sending shrapnel and burning debris into the air. You probably won't survive standing on a nearby deck, but from here, you witness the scale of destruction in all its chaotic glory. Historians still debate the precise sequence of bomb hits and the role of pilot luck versus planning, but the result is indisputable. 3 carriers are burning, tipping the balance of naval power dramatically. The decks are scenes of frantic activity, sailors desperately trying to save equipment, dousing flames, and guiding planes off damaged flight decks. You notice the surreal blend of courage and helplessness, the disciplined training now colliding with chaos that no preparation can fully contain. Quirky details surface. Some crew members, in a last attempt at morale, unfurl small flags or banners, cheering on colleagues as if tiny rituals could stave off catastrophe. Meanwhile, aircraft still in the air navigate smoke and fire, maneuvering with nerve and skill, their pilots holding onto the thinnest threads of hope and timing. You can almost feel the heat from the explosions, the acrid smell of burning fuel and metal, and the tension rolling across the waves like a living thing. Torpedo boats and destroyers dash around, attempting damage control or rescuing men overboard, their crews performing near-impossible feats in treacherous conditions. Historians still argue whether the Japanese fleet could have survived with quicker damage control or different tactical choices, but as you float above the scene, it's clear that a turning point has been violently struck. A fringe tidbit: some Japanese sailors tried to send messages in bottles to nearby ships, a small, almost hopeless gesture against the unstoppable advance of destruction. You watch the final moments of the carrier's decks folding under flames, and the psychological shock rippling through remaining crew and pilots alike. Floating above, the scale of human courage, mechanical vulnerability, and sheer chaos converges into an unforgettable tableau. The infernos mark not just the loss of ships, but the shift in momentum, the moment where the Pacific theater tilts decisively, and you, an unseen observer, are privy to the very instant history pivots. You drift into the remaining skirmishes, the tense aftermath of the carrier infernos, where the human element dominates over machines. Japanese pilots still in the air zigzag desperately, some attempting to regroup, others circling in disbelief at the destruction below. You probably won't survive the flak bursts and strafing runs if you were physically present, but from here, you sense the raw, human struggle of survival, courage, and exhaustion. Historians still debate how much chaos hampered Japanese coordination in these final moments, but what's clear is that heroism and desperation blend in almost every corner of the battlefield. Below, destroyers maneuver to rescue sailors from the fiery decks, tossing lifeboats and rafts into the waves, sailors reaching with outstretched arms, hair plastered with sweat and smoke. You notice small gestures that highlight humanity amid warfare, a pilot helping a fellow crewman out of the water, a sailor passing a life jacket to a struggling comrade, acts that seem almost cinematic against the backdrop of mechanical destruction. Meanwhile, U.S. aircraft continue strafing runs, yet commanders exercise restraint, aware that excessive pursuit could leave their own carriers vulnerable. A quirky detail emerges. Some sailors recorded battle events in shorthand on scraps of paper, hoping to chronicle moments they might never survive to recount formally. The chaos also extends to retreat maneuvers. Damaged Japanese ships attempt to withdraw, engines smoking, crew exhausted and disoriented. You can almost hear the murmurs of despair and determination blending into the ambient roar of the Pacific. Historians still argue whether the fleet's withdrawal could have been executed more efficiently, but in this tense liminal space, time seems both compressed and stretched, seconds carrying immense consequence. You observe midshipmen and officers improvising, making split-second decisions that ripple outward, defining who survives and who is lost. And yet, amid the struggle, there's a fringe tidbit. Some sailors kept tiny trinkets or personal notes close even as they abandoned their burning vessels, a reminder of life beyond war. You sense the interplay of strategy, human instinct, and sheer luck as the remaining ships slip away, battered and weary. Every maneuver, every rescue, and every miscalculation adds to the mosaic of heroism and tragedy, leaving the Pacific waters littered with memory and flame. Floating above it all, you feel the quiet thrill of endurance and the sobering weight of sacrifice, the kind of moment that echoes through history even as the smoke begins to settle. You glide into the broader perspective now, where the significance of Midway begins to crystallize beyond the immediate chaos. The U.S. Navy, though battered, has achieved what seemed almost impossible, a decisive shift in momentum, a psychological and strategic victory that reverberates across the Pacific. You probably won't feel the full weight of this as a participant, but from here, you sense the tide turning, the ocean itself seeming to carry a different energy, lighter in some ways, charged in others. Historians still debate whether Midway alone could have ended Japanese expansion or if it was merely the beginning of a broader recalibration, yet its impact on morale and strategy is undeniable. Admirals on both sides reassess, calculating losses, capabilities, and the ripple effects across supply lines and future campaigns. You notice subtle shifts. U.S. commanders exude cautious confidence, while Japanese officers struggle with disbelief and the urgent task of regrouping. Tiny quirks appear amid these heavy calculations. Some American officers meticulously write letters to families even as fleets reposition, maintaining humanity in the face of vast, impersonal machinery. Meanwhile, war planners start to realize that carriers, not battleships, will dominate future naval engagements, a lesson painfully reinforced by the morning's destruction. The psychological dimension is equally profound. Sailors and pilots alike carry the emotional residue of the battle, survivors' guilt mingling with exhilaration. You probably didn't realize that morale, more than numbers alone, can pivot entire campaigns. Historians still argue about the precise role intelligence played versus luck, but the consensus is that Midway shattered the myth of Japanese invincibility while cementing U.S. naval confidence. Floating above, you sense the subtle recalibration of strategy, as fleets adjust positions and planners refine future operations in the Pacific theater. A fringe observation emerges. Some Japanese sailors reportedly believed that surviving the infernos or air attacks was due to fate or divine protection, a superstition that spread quietly through small groups even as the empire faced a harsh strategic reality. You drift through these human and operational layers, understanding that war is as much about perception and adaptation as it is about ordnance and tactics. The battle has ended, but its lessons ripple outward, shaping the decisions, fears, and hopes of everyone still afloat in the vast Pacific, leaving you suspended in that fragile, pivotal moment of history. You now float into the calm after the storm, the Pacific stretching endless and deceptively peaceful beneath you. Smoke still curls from the burning wrecks, waves lap against debris, and the cries of survivors echo faintly across the water, mingling with the cries of seabirds and the soft hiss of distant engines. You probably won't feel this serenity if you were in the thick of it, but from here, the contrast between devastation and calm is almost surreal. Historians still debate the broader strategic implications, whether Midway was the decisive turning point or one of several key pivots, but the moral and psychological impact is clear. The myth of Japanese invincibility has been shattered, and the U.S. Navy, battered yet resilient, begins its slow rise to dominance in the Pacific. You notice small human stories that linger amid the larger narrative. Sailors cling to floating wreckage, helping each other stay afloat, while pilots who survived miraculously find their way to friendly vessels. Quirky details emerge. A sailor saves a small, soaked notebook, pages flapping, probably full of sketches, thoughts, or lists of loved ones. Another flounders in the water, clutching a half-burned Lucky Charm, the tiny relic of superstition against a sea of destruction. You sense the profound interplay of chance, courage, and endurance, how survival often hinges on the smallest, most human of acts. Meanwhile, the broader Pacific shifts imperceptibly but irrevocably. Commanders recalibrate strategies, fleets adjust deployments, and intelligence units compile lessons learned, all while survivors slowly return to routine life aboard ships or at distant bases. You probably never thought about how quiet those first hours of reflection could be after such a cataclysmic event, yet they are full of small, consequential decisions. Historians still debate the relative weight of luck versus skill, yet even these discussions underscore the enduring fascination of Midway. And in a final fringe note, Some survivors claim to have dreamt of the battle even after it ended, vivid, haunting, as if their minds replayed heroism and horror simultaneously. You float among these threads of memory, understanding that the human side of history, the stories, the courage, the superstition, the despair, lingers far longer than the statistics or maps can convey. The Pacific remains vast, but the echoes of Midway continue to ripple, a testament to bravery, strategy, and the delicate balance of fate in war. The smoke slowly dissipates from the horizon, leaving only the gentle shimmer of the Pacific under a waning sun. Waves lap softly against scattered debris, carrying the faint scent of salt and charred metal, a quiet reminder of what once raged here. You feel the tension in your body ease, your mind unwinding with each gentle undulation of the water imagined below you. Sailors and pilots alike, those who survived, begin to rest in the shade of the remaining vessels, their bodies sagging with fatigue, their eyes heavy with reflection, yet their hearts quietly buoyed by endurance. You probably never noticed how utterly human these moments can be after chaos, when the ocean itself seems to cradle the survivors, whispering reassurance in rhythm with the breeze. Tiny details now emerge more vividly: the ripple of waves across a floating notebook, a lone life jacket bobbing slowly, the glint of a charm held tightly in a trembling hand. Even in the absence of explosions, the weight of history lingers, subtle yet undeniable. You breathe in this calm, imagining the distant chatter of crews settling into the quiet, murmuring prayers or recounting stories of bravery in hushed tones. Each story, each memory, carries the legacy of those who acted, survived, and shaped the future. And as night descends, painting the ocean in indigo and silver, you drift along with the gentle rocking of waves, letting the tension dissolve entirely. Stars blink awake overhead, constellations silently witnessing the aftermath, while the soft hum of the fan, or perhaps the imagined rustle of leaves, becomes the only rhythm that guides you toward rest. You probably won't remember every detail of the battle, but the courage, the choices, and the fragile thread of survival will linger in your subconscious, a gentle echo as sleep takes hold.